All right, ladies and gentlemen, I am really excited about interviewing my friend Joe Quero. Known Joe for about a year, maybe 2 years now. We met through the Chamber of Commerce out here in East County, and kind of got to engage in a couple spaces there. So that's been super fun. But Joe is a trader, and he moved away to Kansas City, and he's just been spending the last 20 minutes bragging about all the amazing barbecue he has. I feel like in California, though, East County, it's like that's the closest we're gonna. I'm not saying it's Kansas City barbecue, but it's probably the closest that we're gonna get. So besides my jealousy about the grub that you're getting out there, I would love to spend some time, Joe, getting to know who you are. Let's start with like, where'd you grow up? How'd you grow up? Bring us all the way up into the point of where you met your wife. And then after that, we'll talk a little bit about why you wanted to jump on the podcast, and then we'll get into your story. So I'll pass it over to you, brother. Let us know who Joe is.
Sounds good. Before I get into that, though, I could understand how you call me a trader, but I'm still a Charger fan. I'm still a Padre fan. So, we gotta set that clear.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Yeah. To be fair.
I just wanted to throw that out there. All right. So Joe, this is a lot of moving parts to my story. I grew up in the Philippines. I was born in the Philippines. But before, what was that?
I didn't know that.
Yeah. Well, before I get to there, my mom and dad actually met in the States. My mom's a Filipino citizen. My dad's a French citizen. And a fun fact, I was actually the product of their infidelity. So they were both married to somebody else, and they just happened to kind of have an affair. And then I popped out. And my mom had to go back to the Philippines to get her, citizenship and all that kind of stuff, paperwork, all taken care of. So I was born in the Philippines just because that's how things worked out. I came here at a very young age. My mom's an immigrant. My dad is as well. And we grew up in Southeast San Diego, over there by Lincoln High School. So I'm not originally an East Countian. I grew up in the ghetto in San Diego. I remember my skin shade in some of my neighborhoods were not dark enough or not light enough. That's just kind of how I remember things, because in those hoods, you have a lot of racial tension in there as it is. And so I just kind of remember growing up pretty rough. I never fit in to either, any race that kind of came into the projects that I lived in. So it was kind of cool to experience that as well, because I realized quickly as a kid that, dude, this stuff is jacked up. You know what I mean? Like, the crime is high. People don't like each other even in poor neighborhoods because of skin color. So I really appreciated that I grew up that way. Now that I look back into it, it was kind of hard. But I went to the language academy as a kid. I grew up speaking French, English, and then Tagalog is the national language for the Filipinos. I only understood when my mom was about to beat me, really. Like, we never learned. But if the tone of voice got up and there was certain key words, I just knew take cover, hide behind your bed, something flying at you. Because my mom, we grew up in a third world country, so that's kind of how they did things. I remember coming home from school one time with a letter from the teacher, and they're like, I thought it was like a positive note to take home. And I was like proud to give it to my mom. And they said, your son probably has ADHD, get him on drugs. And she just said, I'm going to beat the ADHD out of you. You know what I mean? Like, this is what happens here. So that was kind of like my growing up phase. Again, I didn't really know that it was bad until I kind of grew up and became a father myself.
Right.
I kind of look back at those things and laugh too, because it was a really interesting way to grow up. We were out all day. We came home and the lights turned off. That's kind of how I grew up in a pretty cool neighborhood like that. Because we didn't understand that we were in a bad neighborhood. We didn't understand that we were in a poor neighborhood. So anyways, I grew up, I went to San Diego High School. I did not graduate there. I was threatened. So we went to charter school. I just kind of finished up my high school at charter school, and then just kind of went into the workforce. I met my wife, however, at 8 years old at my church. She kind of visited with her dad. Her dad was an assistant pastor. He visited the church, and then they started going to church. So actually, I grew up with my wife in church.
Wow.
As a kid. I had a crush on her. She hid my guts, because my communication of a crush was just to bully her. You know what I mean? Like, just kind of pull her hair, throw wet stuff at her, things like that. So now that we're married, she told me that one time she went in her car and she's like, I hate that Joe kid. And her mom was like, be careful, you might marry him one day. And then look at,
oh my God.
I like to say she's prophetic, but
yeah, it's kind of like the old school maxim that was like, oh, he only picks on you because he likes you. And it's like,
right,
oh,
exactly.
Get rid of that. That's
So I mean, and we were dating at 14, 15, like we were in youth group together. I kind of already knew that I wanted to marry this girl. She didn't know if I was going to be somebody she married, but she really liked me as well. But after we felt like God said, yeah, you're going to marry each other, we just kind of decided to forego college and just kind of get married at 18, 19. And, we were supposed to travel the world. We were going to wait 5 years to have a kid. And then, we got married, and 6 months later, she's pregnant.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And I remember the day, like I come home and, we're not rich. We're living in a garage, and then she shows me the test and I'm just quiet for 2 weeks. Like I don't even know what to say. I feel like I'm a teenager that just had a kid, right? Like I just got this girl knocked up in school. That's how I felt.
Right.
We're married. I'm like, everything's fine, but I'm like, this was not supposed to happen. I looked at God. I'm like, God, this is crazy. Are you joking with me? It's like, this is not my plan.
Yeah.
But it was what it was. After 2 weeks, we started getting excited, and our first daughter is born. And then the funny thing about that is when our first daughter was born, we looked at each other like, okay, now we're gonna wait. Well, 5 months later, she's pregnant again.
Yeah.
And these two, my first 2 kids were all birth control babies. It was crazy. Like we were on
birth control babies, as in you guys were on birth control and you still got pregnant?
We were on a form of birth control. Later on, did we find out that she wasn't using it right?
Form of birth control don't work.
Yeah. Well, I thought that was Superman. Like, shoot, I can bypass birth control, baby. What?
Yeah.
It's like, yeah. No, we just kind of found out after like looking back, she wasn't really using the birth control right. Or I kind of feel like she secretly got off of it because she was really trying to, I don't know. I have these weird theories.
She's just lying to you.
Yeah.
All right.
But yeah, that's kind of my story. Kind of grew up like that. My wife, on the other hand, she kind of grew up pretty wealthy. So it was a really interesting dynamic in the beginning of our marriage. Like I can sleep on a cot with cockroaches on the floor, and she couldn't. And so the beginning of our marriage was very, very interesting.
Yeah, to each their own. I grew up in a double wide trailer in Paris, California, in between an onion and a potato farm. And I cannot sleep on a cot. I think it's like you land in different places, right? Like it's kind of like, nope, I don't even like camping. But it's like part of me is like, I did my time. I'm like, I'm such a priss. Like I just like I need a bed. I need my bed. Like when I do youth outreach ministry, and we do camping a lot, right? So we go to camps and sleep in bunks. And if I don't have like my like duffel bag of like egg crate, style, comforter with my own pillow. If I don't have that, then I have a queen size blow up bed. I refuse to sleep in a nasty, cot thing. But I also do that like every summer and then over a bunch of weekends during the year. So yeah, it's like, it's funny. It's like you maybe you do come from like a poor background, but it's like sometimes it's like, hey, I'm done. I'm out. I got out. I'm staying out. But I'd love to hear, like, tell us about your career. Tell us about your passions. Tell us about what you do.
Yeah, well, interesting you asked. So I remember in high school, I kind of already had my mind made up as to what I wanted to be. I was either going to be a cop or an entrepreneur because, my wife's dad was an entrepreneur and I really looked up to him. Like he owned all these homes, he had a business, but I also wanted to be a cop because that was a childhood thing. So, right into high school, I decided to forego college. I was like, hey, if all the richest people in the world probably have little to no college, then why the heck do I need it, right?
Right.
I also heard an interesting statistic that 9 out of 10 businesses will fail. So I'm like, cool, let me start with the first one, which I don't recommend to anybody on this podcast listening. That is a very smart thing to do because it's not. You don't want to just go off starting to fail businesses just to get to your successful one. Yeah. But my small-minded thinking was just like, hey, well, let me start with the first one. If it fails, at least I have 9 more to go. And then one of them, that led to my wife and I, somewhat being kind of homeless in a garage and things like that. But out of high school, I was just trying to do anything. I, bought some vending machines and gumball machines. That was supposed to take off and we're supposed to become millionaires. Never happened. We sold insurance. We did things like that. And then after about maybe 7 or 8 failed attempts at businesses, I was like, screw it, I'm not going to do business. I'm going to go into the career. So I applied for the San Diego County Sheriff's Department and I got into the academy. But that was a very short-lived career, never kind of took off.
Why not?
Well, I got out of the academy. I finished the academy. Everything was great. Applied to become a reserve, and then I just needed to make money. So I didn't get accepted full time. It was a reserve program. So as I was volunteering, I needed to make money. So I just kind of applied everywhere. I was on Craigslist, and there was a guy that said, "Hey, do you want to make $5,000 a month working 15 days out of the month?" I'm like, "This sounds too good to be true," but something in me said, "Hey, apply for it." Well, it turned out it was a duct cleaning company, and they worked these weird hours, and I was able to do
Yeah.
that. And so I started making really good money with that company. And so when a full-time opportunity came for law enforcement, I forewent it because I was able to be flexible here, made much more money. After doing that for about 4 years, my check started bouncing. Things started going on a little shady in the background. And in 2014, it was Christmas 2014. My last check did not cash because it couldn't. There was no funds in there, and I just looked at my wife. I said, "We got to do something. I can't go back to law enforcement because I'm not making as much as we're used to anymore. But we got to do something here." So literally, we said, "Hey, after Christmas, we're starting our own business. We're going to do this thing called air duct cleaning." And so, yeah, January 6th, 2015, we got our business license, got the insurance, all that kind of stuff, and we just went with it. I started calling all the contacts I knew, and then the first year we made $100,000. I mean, God was really good and gracious to us.
Yeah.
And that's pretty much how the air duct cleaning company came about. So in East County, I was the #1 air duct cleaner, absolute duct and chimney cleaning. And I got to know great people like yourself, Cameron Stewart, all those people that just kind of helped me get my credibility in East County, to where it grew big enough and profitable enough to where I was able to sell it this year and move out here to Kansas City and just live a slower lifestyle, which I really was looking forward to.
Yeah, tell me about the move. Moves are big. I mean, especially moving out of state to another place. I assume you didn't have much of a connection to Kansas City, but tell me a little bit about what led to that. Why Kansas City? And I'd love to kind of hear what you're doing now too.
Absolutely. So why Kansas City? That kind of goes back 17 years ago when I was in youth group at church. Christy, my wife's dad, was the pastor, and her and I were involved in the youth ministry. We came to this place called IHOP, International House of Prayer, here in Kansas City. I'm not sure if you've ever heard of it, but it's a place where it's 24-hour prayer and worship. And so we came out here just to kind of refresh our spiritual selves. And I just kind of had a feeling. I was like, dude, I like this place. And this is back when we were 17 years old. It's like, dude, I love this place. I could see ourselves living here one day. And she was like, yeah, right. Never going to live with my family. Well, we ended up getting married. We forget all about it. And then, last year during COVID and all the shutdowns and everything going on, we just kind of felt in our hearts like, hey, this would be a perfect time and a perfect opportunity to make our move if we ever wanted to. We don't know if this is going to be a permanent move. We don't know if our paths are going to come back to San Diego, but we've never left California. I'm like, I mean, America is huge. The United States is huge. Why don't we just go on off and explore something? So Kansas City, we have that tie because of ministry out here. And then we have one friend that actually made the move right before we did. So we had a friend that moved out here, and that's really kind of what led us to that. But we were looking at places like Nashville, Tennessee. We're looking at places like Idaho. But we had a friend here. So it was just an easier decision to make to come out this way.
Yeah, I feel like Nashville and Boise are just exploding. And now I feel like it's the big moves are to Texas. So I feel like Austin and Dallas has a bunch of Californians in it now too.
Yeah.
Like
I don't really like it too much, but
it's the Grand California Exodus, right? Like it keeps happening right now, which is that's not what this podcast is about. So whatever.
No.
Okay, career-wise, what are you doing now? What's your family investing your profession into? How are you paying the bills?
Absolutely. So the way we pay the bills is I'm a business coach. So I became a business coach in California. The last 3 years of my duct cleaning business, we grew it to the point where I didn't even have to show up anymore. I did for team meetings and things like that, but the business literally ran better without me. I just was the visionary. And so I became a business coach because I was so passionate about helping others do the same thing. I heard the statistic about how businesses fail at a large rate because of burnout. People are just grinding. They're not creating systems. So I thought, hey, there's a huge need for this. Let me help out our local economy by helping small businesses because they're failing at a rapid rate. Something like 80% of businesses will fail in their first 5 years, and the majority of it is due to burnout. So I really wanted to become a solution to that, for the people that have enough buy-in to their business. Also, with the sale of the business, we were able to acquire some money, and I'm doing some real estate investment out here in the Midwest, which is really, really fun. Haven't really done that before. But the fact that I can buy a house that would be normally worth $1.8 million in San Diego for like $350,000 out here, it's a great opportunity, and I'm learning a lot. Out here, everybody has basements because of tornadoes, but
Yeah.
you know. So the fact that you can actually, renovate your basement and add square footage to your house and increase, I'm learning all these things are just really, really interesting, or flipping homes or buying rentals. It's fun.
Oh, I love that, man. That's cool. Well, thanks for giving a little bit of just kind of like a jump into your life and like what you're doing outside of work, outside of family. What are your like biggest passions and hobbies? Like, what are the things that maybe we wouldn't know unless we like caught you on that chat room talking about that thing that we didn't know you were all about?
Yeah. Well, when it comes to family, one of my favorite things to do is to date my wife and to date my daughters. I have 3 daughters.
Mm.
That's like, if you ever ask me, hey, do you want to date your daughters or wife? I'm like, yeah, I love to eat and I love to talk to them.
Yeah.
But on a personal level, a couple of things. I love competition shooting. I shoot handguns, I shoot shotguns, I shoot ARs. I love competition shooting.
Are you any good?
I would like to think I'm okay.
Okay.
I mean, there's certainly people that are much better than I am, but I don't do a lot of competition where it's like just nothing but speed. I do like tactical competition, like IDPA, things like that.
Yeah.
And that's just normally for me, just to kind of help with my skills. When I was training in the academy, I just kind of grew a big love for, the concept and the theory of shooting and tactics and things like that. So I really liked it.
Okay. All right. So you a Call of Duty fan or something like that too, or is this all practical, like tactical?
No, this is practical. Call of Duty is funny. I really don't do much video games. I get dizzy, and one time I like threw up after playing a video game. I'm like, I can't do this anymore. So I don't know if it's like whatever it is. I can't really do it.
Oh, that's funny. Yeah.
But getting a bunch of kids on an paintball field or airsoft field, that's fun.
Oh, there you go. Yeah. Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, I did a paintball fundraiser and we had a bunch of teenagers there, and I won't do that again because they were freaking brutal, man. They don't. You put your hands up, I'm out. They're just like, I didn't see it, you little liar. Are you telling?
The thing shot on accident. I'm not sure what happened.
My fault. But the problem is with those paintball guns, they do go off. Like, you ever get that thing where it's just happening?
Yeah.
So you could totally blame people. But okay, cool. Yeah, thanks again for giving a little glimpse on who Joe is and your family and kind of your journey so far. That's so much I didn't know. I feel like I could spend a lot more time asking you questions about that, but I want to move forward. I'd love to know, before we get into your story on Miscarriage, what made you want to do the podcast? When did you become aware of it? I mean, you reached out saying, hey, I'd be down to do this. I'd love to hear about, how'd you hear about it? And then what kind of prompted you to say, like, yeah, I would do that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So obviously my story of miscarriage, there's a lot of, trauma behind that. And so when you kind of blasted out the thing on Facebook and said, hey, any men out there that experienced this, I would love to talk to them. Like, you know what, this would be a great way to heal, because I think that sometimes these things come back. I have dreams sometimes. I'm like, you know what, if I just talk about it, sometimes men don't want to talk, and other men can really benefit from just hearing the pain of another man that's willing to expose their vulnerabilities. I found that to be true with business. So I was like, you know what, this might be a great opportunity, not just to heal for myself, but maybe there's guys out there that haven't truly healed yet. Because I felt like when I went through I went through multiple miscarriages. I felt like the expectation of me was just to be strong and to move on and to work and to provide, which, yes, ultimately it came down to that. But like, I had nobody to talk to. I didn't know who to talk to. So I just kind of shoved everything down, suppressed it, and then just kind of moved on. I had to be strong for my wife and my kids, who were super emotional about it. Yeah. So I just thought that this would be a great way just to help me, honestly, and to help everybody else. So I hope you don't mind. I'm a little bit selfish about this, but
No, that's so funny. I'm glad that you brought that up. The deeper I get into these interviews, because we're in season 2 now, which I don't know how long this is going to go. I'm going to do it as long as I keep running into guys that want to do it. But it's been so funny. I feel selfish. I guess I'll just jump in that boat with you. Mm-hmm. I have been able to process and heal. And there's some stuff I think in this for some people that never heals, right? But to tend to those wounds of my experience, because I've been able to listen to these stories and interview guys and do it in a way that I want to do it. So if it makes you feel better, I'm the most selfish person on the podcast, because I'm running all the interviews and picking all the people and asking all the questions. So I just want to affirm you, like, no, bro, be selfish. Like, it's your turn. It's your turn to be selfish. But the more interviews I do, the more I'm running into guys that are tapping into I need this. And I think other guys need this too. I think the first couple interviews I did were just with personal relationships, people I knew, and it really was about me just getting what I need. And now I'm feeling like I don't have to fight for that as I seek, hearing other guys' stories and giving them a space to process.
Yeah.
I'm getting everything I could need and more, and it is producing some of those dividends. And so I'm glad I asked you that question now instead of the end of the podcast, because I am bringing new people in and asking them. So if you're a guy out there and you're listening to this and you heard what Joe said and that resonates with you, please reach out. I'll mention this. I mentioned this in the intro and outro, but you can email me at menonmiscarriage@gmail.com and say that you want to do this interview. So I'm doing a lot more Zoom interviews as well, because of people being around the country, which is just awesome. I'm having just a bitchin' time doing that, but reach out to me. And especially as you listen to the rest of Joe's story, it might spark something in you. Every story I hear is different. So different. I thought when doing these interviews, it was going to be like, oh, well, this will be good. I'll do 5 or 6 because everybody's story is the same.
Yeah.
No way in hell has it been anything close to that. So I'd love to start the process of listening to your story. So you kind of gave us a little bit of where you're at with your wife, getting pregnant. So let's jump back in. You had your first kid and then you got into your second pregnancy. So let's jump right back into where we were in the story right there, flush out the rest of the story and bring us to what I like to call the story, that kind of sets this off. And I know you had multiple miscarriages. So get us to that first one and then we'll kind of recalibrate there, but I want to hear about all of it.
Absolutely. So yeah, so we heard about my first daughter, not trying to expect it, but just God blessed us with that. And, we didn't know that it was a blessing until, her mom died 2 months later. And on her deathbed, she was like, my prayer was to at least see my first grandchild. So we know at that point, we knew that God gave us that child to comfort her mother who died of cancer. She was battling cancer about 6 years, 7 years. And then our second daughter was, we conceived her about 4 to 5 months after our first one was born. And so apparently women after you have a baby, you're extra fertile. So we didn't know that. Because we thought like she was on some type of birth control. I think the second one she was or not, but we heard this crazy thing that if you're breastfeeding, it's really hard for you to get pregnant. She was breastfeeding, she got pregnant. So if you're ever thinking about that out there, guys, if you're listening, just make sure you have that extra protection because, something can happen. Wow. But anyways, second daughter, we're born. We're 2 for 2, right? And so we're praising God for that. And my second one is born because my wife went through a lot of postpartum stuff after our first daughter was born because her mom died. We're literally like teenagers, and when we're 18, 19, we're parents. So it was really, really tough for my wife. And then we were also going through a lot of financial hardship. So our second daughter was born and she like literally always smiled. I mean, there was nothing that could not let her smile. So we believe that God blessed us with our second one to bring joy to my wife, like extra joy. We were able to manage 6 years without having another baby. We found something that worked, and we're like, we're gonna plan this one out, And so, we had a great life with our 2, and then we actually literally planned to get pregnant 6 years later. We're like, hey, let's get pregnant. So we did it. And so we're 3 for 3. Our third daughter was born. Her name is Jade, and she was literally born a year after my mom passed away of the same cancer my mother-in-law died from. So we just kind of,
What kind of cancer?
It was ovarian cancer.
I'm sorry to hear that.
But the good thing about it was that they love the Lord and were confident in the hope they're in heaven, and that we're gonna meet them one day. But so our third daughter was born, and we just kind of felt like it was God doing the same thing for us to bring joy in our time of grief. So we're 3 for 3. We're like, okay, cool. Do we stop? Do we keep going? So it wasn't like, hey, we're gonna stop, or we're gonna keep going. It's like whatever happens, right? Mm-hmm. And so my wife literally looked at me a year later. It's like, it would be nice to have a boy. I'm like, well, I don't know how to make boys. Apparently, my body only knows how to make girls, right? We're 3 for 3. So we literally got some counseling, and the Catholic Church has a really good class on tracking like cycles and knowing when it's the best time for a girl, best time for a boy, things like that. And so we're like, okay, cool. Let's try for a boy, because we kind of tracked our cycle and we knew like the best times to be intimate to have a boy. And so we went ahead and did that, and she gets pregnant, and we're like, yes, this actually literally worked, right?
Yeah.
But a few months into it, the first pregnancy of what we believe was our boy, we were at a marriage conference at the Rock Church. We went to Palm Springs, and she starts bleeding heavily, right? And obviously, when somebody's like in her, the first trimester of having a child and you're bleeding heavily, that's never a good sign, right? But I think we were kind of in denial, to be quite frank with you, because we're 3 for 3. Like we always heard that most of the time miscarriages happen in the beginning. Like that's at least what we heard. But again, we've never had a miscarriage, so it was never anything that we kind of knew about. We knew of other people that had a miscarriage, but we never experienced that. So we're like, you know what? I think it's okay. That's and my wife was like, hey, let's just kind of play out the weekend. Let's finish the marriage retreat, because she was bleeding heavily, like a period, but not like anything what we kind of looked at was a miscarriage, like nothing clumpy or anything like that. So we come back from the retreat. She's still bleeding, but it kind of stopped bleeding a little bit. On Monday, we had our team meeting. She comes in after the team meeting and she walks into the office, and then she looks down. There's a pile of blood under her feet, and she kind of passes out. So her sister's our office manager for Absolute. She literally puts her in the car and takes her to the hospital. I remember getting the call. I was training somebody out in the field. We were cleaning an air duct in this really expensive house. And I'm like, look, I know you're only 2 months in, but you're going to have to figure this one out because I'm gone, right? And he's like, dude, go boss. So I left. I remember going to Grossmont Hospital, and I come in and I look at her and she's pale. Like, she lost so much blood. We were told that if she would have kept going, she would have most likely been dead. Just lost so much blood. So I'm sitting here thinking like, wow, we've heard of miscarriages before, but we've never ever knew anybody that had this much of a traumatic experience. And so we go in there and they're like, hey, so she's still bleeding. We're going to have to extract all the tissue out and everything like that. And so they have like a suction cup. I hope you don't mind if I get a little bit in detail about all this.
Please go into detail. Yeah, as much as you're comfortable with.
Yeah, so they extract all the tissue, and my heart sinks because I literally can see some of the body parts and stuff like that. So, and honestly, I'm not for abortion or anything like that. And so it kind of also broke my heart to kind of see like the process of how things are going. And just like, this is my son, and this is the only way I'm going to see this son. And so like, I felt like my heart hardened. I didn't cry, but I became very numb. Like my wife was emotional, and I just kind of put this barrier of emotion there so I could be strong for her. And later on did I realize that really kind of festered and became a little bit of poison in my heart, but that was like a year later. Like I literally didn't realize that till a year later. So that was like a whole week-long experience. She was actually hospitalized for a couple to a few days because her blood levels were so low. She had to have some infusions. So that was our first miscarriage. And I think what kind of was the most painful was we knew that it was most likely our boy, our first boy. So I just kind of felt like on an emotional and spiritual basis, I kind of felt like I wouldn't compare myself to Job from the Bible, because obviously he went through a lot more, but like, why, God, why would you do this to me? Like, this was supposed to be my son, and so I was like, God, like this hurts a lot. I don't even know how to cry right now about it, but why would you do this to me? I've been a faithful servant. I do ministry, I do this, I do that. And kind of like justifying why God should not have done something totally natural, because he's in control of the universe. But at that moment, I'm not thinking like that. I'm just thinking about what I went through,
And it's such a stark contrast from having 3 beautiful girls, over a decade, to go through this. It feels really arbitrary and out of place.
Right, because I'm like, we're 3 for 3, so I guess we're never gonna have a miscarriage. But it happened. And there was a lot in my heart that later on I had to find out that God was purposely using that situation to extract a lot of pride that I had, that I just kind of shoved down from being poor, having to hustle, doing all these kind of things. Because like when God exposed those things in my heart later on, I'm like, holy crap, this is stuff from like way back when, But going back to the story, like my wife had moments where she was just like bawling, and I'm just there to kind of comfort her. And again, I still feel numb. Like I'm sad, I'm hurt, I'm somewhat offended by the Lord for doing this to me. But I'm just kind of like, boom, like that glassy-eyed poker face. And then so we just kind of get back into the groove of things, you know. Oh, this is a really interesting thing. At the marriage conference, while we were having the miscarriage and we were in denial about it, literally this lady that we have no idea who was came up to us and said, what you feel like is pain right now, God is going to use for his glory. And he's still promised you, and he's still faithful to come through on that promise. And we're like, what are you talking about?
Like, I'm good. Thanks.
First of all, I don't know who you are. That was really weird. And okay, whatever, right? That was just our attitude. We were in denial about it. So let me see here. That was in 2018. 2019 comes around, and we try for another boy. So like we followed the plan.
Yeah.
And boom, like sure enough, you know, once we got intimate, a week later, she's like hormonal and everything like that. We take a test and she's positive, you know.
Yeah.
This one wasn't as much of a traumatic incident, but literally about a month and a half into her first trimester, she starts bleeding again. Obviously, this time around, we're not as in denial about it because we're like,
not as ignorant, right? Like, you know what's going on.
So, but this time around, she did not have a bad traumatic experience, but it was still very emotional for her because we were in like the height of our business. I mean, we were making a lot of money. There was just a lot of changes going on, things like that. We were growing. And so we felt like we didn't have a minute to pause and to really be as emotional about this miscarriage. And I honestly think, I can only speak for myself, not for my wife. I literally tried to ignore it because I did not want to go through it again. Honestly, like, I just like, crap, Lord, if this is happening, I prayed. I said, please at least don't make it as bad as the first one. Like, please, you know, give us at least a little bit of grace and mercy on this one. And he did. Like, the miscarriage was almost as if it didn't happen, but we knew it happened because, you know, when you sit on the toilet and everything comes out, it's like, okay, we knew what that was.
Yeah.
But my wife was very emotional about that one, and most likely because of her first experience going through it.
Mm-hmm.
And at that point, I think, like, Tobias, to be quite frank with you, I'm like, I don't want to ever get you pregnant again. Like, I don't know if I can handle this.
Absolutely.
Really, we have 3 beautiful girls. Forget the idea of having a boy. I don't even know if it'll be worth trying, to be honest with you.
What kind of, if I can interrupt you for a second, what kind of did you have to get over, even going from the first one to the second one? So I know that's how you feel coming out of the second one, but I imagine you feel a little bit of that. You know, I know I felt gun shy after our miscarriage. How you so it was 2018 the first one, 2019 in the second one. So I know that there's a good chunk of time. But what led you to want to go for the second one? What was your attitude? And then we can jump back into after the second one.
Yeah. Okay. So for the second one was really to kind of make my wife happy. She was still kind of emotional, and she's like, "Look, I really want to try," and I did not want to like bust her bubble about it. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So, you know, we came back from a really good date night, and she was like, "I'm ready to go." I'm like, "Cool, I'm ready to go too." And so it just kind of, there was really not much thought into that, rather than just, hey, let me make my wife happy. You know, like, I really crossed my fingers. Hey, one miscarriage is another, most likely it won't happen. So after the second one, it was kind of like, no, I'm sorry, babe. Like, I really don't even know if I can handle this again. Because again, like, I felt like I closed up even more, like, literally.
Yeah.
Because it's our boy. Like, God, you gave me 3 girls that didn't even try, to be honest with you. Now I'm trying for a boy, and I felt like emotionally he was kind of playing with me. Again, it doesn't mean that it's true. Just in my flesh, in my emotions, that's exactly how it felt.
What a heavy feeling. Like, you come as a person of faith. I know not everybody listening to the podcast comes from a position of faith, but like, even if you can put yourself in that scenario, that you have this like benevolent, loving, you know, father figure, you know, God that's in control, wants to bless you, and then to the turn of phrase to feel like he's messing with you. It's like, talk about trauma. It's not just the trauma of the experience. It's also the trauma of your worldview getting rocked, right? Questioned and challenged. That in and of itself is traumatic. And I know that was for me. Okay. So now after the second one, you're feeling like, I don't even want to try to do this again. Are you still there? Did you stay there? Like, what happened next?
What happened next was, I think I stayed in that mental spot for a while, you know, just kind of getting numb. Honestly, our marriage started to get a little rocky. You know, we started getting into a lot of arguments, and we didn't even know why. Yeah. Later on, we found out that it was just really, we didn't talk about this. We didn't really like sit down and say, hey, babe, like, I know we just went through this. Let's pray together. Let's get some counseling. We didn't even get counseling or anything like that, which I would suggest if anybody goes through something that traumatic with their spouse, counseling, talking to somebody who's been through it or who just has, education behind how to talk and how to get things out and how to, overcome, that definitely helps. We did a little late, but like we literally were starting to talk about like, I'll leave you then, you'll leave me. Like we got into some pretty
Yeah.
gnarly fights. And again, like I'm fine being open about this now because I know that this is normal when
Yeah.
people go through trauma like this.
Yeah.
And here we are, we made vows.
We got to pause real quick there because like that's so huge what you just said. Like I guarantee you there's a guy, there's a girl that needs to hear what you just said, that like this is so normal. And maybe normal's not the best word, but like this happens to so many people. This is to be expected, especially the conflict, especially the stuff that feels out of place. Like going through a miscarriage, experiencing something like this once, twice, three times, whatever, it doesn't matter. It is so traumatic and it will rock anybody. And it grabs what feels like the most firm foundation stuff and just cracks it.
Yeah.
And it is not a bad thing for that to happen. I mean, it sucks, but it doesn't mean you're bad. It doesn't mean that your marriage is going to fail. It doesn't, at least it doesn't have to. And,
well, we choose that part.
right. Yeah, no, but sorry, I hate to interrupt and do that. It just, that needed to get repeated because I feel like that's so important. Like this happens and this happens to a lot of people. So don't think that this somehow qualifies something that's not real or disqualifies you from something. Like this is something that a lot of people go through. So find some kind of solace and normalcy in that. But okay, go ahead and continue.
For sure, for sure. Just to emphasize on what you said, something like 25 to 30% of people actually experience miscarriages. So it's a high number.
It's huge. Yeah. So the stat, I've looked so much into the stats on this one. I mentioned this before, but you never know if this is somebody's first podcast, but the stats they have right now is actually one in five pregnancies, not 1 in 5 people, 1 in 5 pregnancies ends in a miscarriage, 20%. And that does not lead to you getting to meet your baby. So some people it's going to be higher, some people it's going to be lower. But they say that it's 1 in 5, they, as in those that are just keep records on this stuff. But I've heard a lot of professionals that I've talked to about it say it's actually more likely 1 in 4 because the amount of miscarriages that don't get reported.
Exactly.
Just was like, oh man, like that's insane. So yeah, it's so common. It's so common.
Yeah. We didn't report our second one just because we didn't even want to go and do that.
Yeah.
But so going back to like the conflict, like, so literally we didn't talk about it. We just bottled it in. We had our crying nights. And it got to the point where literally like we had so much animosity for each other and we didn't even know why. And we were taking like low blow shots at each other. Like I remember, and I feel so bad that I did this to my wife, but she was on a diet when she was first on her first, miscarriage. And I was so angry with her one time that I literally blamed her because she was on her diet, and that hurt her so bad. And now that I think about it, I'm like, I literally blamed her for our kid. I literally blamed her for murdering our kid. Like that's kind of how she probably took it. Like because of me, my kid didn't survive. And I really asked her to forgive me for that. And I had to ask the Lord to forgive me for that one because out of my flesh, I just hurt her. Yeah. But we would get into fights like that to the point where we made these vows and we'll always talk about like, no matter what we go through, we'll never end this in divorce, to where I'm like, I'm leaving. I don't care, and she would say the same thing. And it was to the point where like, wow, are we really that numb to everything going on that we're willing to attack each other when we really need to be coming together, So we got some counseling at Foothills. Foothills, if you remember their church, they give you some free counseling, and we started paying for the counseling. So it was really Pastor Daniel. I don't know if you know him, but he's a really cool guy.
Yeah.
Forgot his last name, but he really kind of walked us through a lot of this stuff. And so talking about it with somebody else there to mediate so that we don't sit here and start jabbing each other really kind of helped us.
Yeah.
So we found a lot of healing with each other in just forgiving each other and being okay with the fact that this happens to a lot of people. And it was just so happened to be our turn, when it came to this. Yeah, it was really traumatic how the first one happened, especially. And then the second one, we were just so numb that like we didn't care, or at least that's how it felt. But in no way was our attacks towards each other justified. Like, there's no way I can justify literally blaming her to
Yeah, just understanding something doesn't mean that you have to justify it. Seeking understanding doesn't always have to mean that you validate it. Yeah, I think that's a really good distinction.
Yeah. So we found a lot of healing. We draw closer together as a family. And she looks at me one day and she's like, can we try for a third time? And I looked at her, I said, this is painful for me to say, but I told her, I said, let's try it. But if this happens a third time, I need you to understand that I'm done. Like I cannot go through this as a man, as a provider, as somebody who, feels like I need to be able to protect, and I feel like I can't during miscarriage.
Yeah, that's hard because like that's an activity you want to head into with a lot of hope and a lot of excitement. And it's such a bummer how much past miscarriages can rob you of the joy pursuing something in the future, but it's a reality, right? It's just a reality. I felt the same way when we started trying again after our miscarriage. And then people that want to hear my story can go back to my podcast, but like that's such a heavy feeling. It feels so rotten, you know? I just resonate with that. I have no advice. I have nothing on top of that other than I know exactly how that feels.
Yeah, exactly. As a matter of fact, I think I followed your story on Facebook when you announced that you and your wife lost your baby. And in my heart, I'm like, man, Lord, bless Tobias. I could literally know how he's feeling or imagine how he's feeling right now. So you never knew it, but I actually prayed for you and I kept your family in prayer just for peace.
I didn't know it, but I felt it, brother.
Yeah. But so we try, and this time there's no miscarriage the first trimester. So we announce it the second trimester, and we do a gender reveal. It's a boy, and we're just so thankful. But in the back of my mind, I'm like, God, please, like, if it's now far along, I don't even know how I'm gonna react. Like in the back of my mind, I was always having this conversation with God, like, okay, it's 6 months in now. Please have mercy. Like, please don't let this happen. So he's due April of this year. We move. We spend Christmas in San Diego. We visit as many people as possible. We move out here January 31st of this year. And the pregnancy is doing fine. We went through a lot of stress with the move because not only did we sell our business, we moved out of state, we took our kids out of the school, we're planning a different school season. We didn't realize how much we were putting on our plate just by moving at the time we did move.
Right.
But our attitude was like, if we're going to do it, let's just do it now before we change our mind. Right. So it's like, we went off and did that. So we moved January 31st. At the end of February, I come back down to San Diego to sign some papers for the sale of our business and finish things up with my clients that are business coaching clients. And then I get a call that my wife is going into labor. Her water broke. And
how far along is she at this point?
She is barely 7 months. So he's 2 months early. If he's coming out, he's 2 months early. So I'm like, crap, all these familiar feelings are coming up, right? Like, okay, is there blood? No, it's just water. Okay, at least it's just water and not blood. Just all these thoughts are going through my head. And I landed in San Diego, got the call. I booked some tickets. I'm going back. But there's no direct flight. So I landed in Denver. She's already on the hospital bed. His heart stops beating inside. Because the doctors were like, hey, so if the water broke, no big deal. We can try to delay the labor. He's fine. He's on his umbilical cord. He can breathe, all that kind of stuff. Well, then they start monitoring him and they don't hear a heartbeat, right? They don't hear all that kind of stuff. So they're like, hey, I know you want to wait, but we're going to have to cut him out, because if he's not breathing in there or his heartbeat's not going on, we need to make sure that we can revive him. So I'm literally right there while she's having a cesarean on FaceTime on a layover in Denver. And I feel helpless, But at this time, I'm like, well, God, at least, because when he comes out during the FaceTime, then he just lets out this yelling, and then my heart, like, I get so happy, like, okay, God, he didn't die. Thank you. And I literally go in the airport and I pull off my mask. I'm like, God, I just had a baby. Like, this is Denver airport. I don't know if you've ever been to the Denver airport. It's huge.
Massive.
And then like there's these guys in the back of the bar, like, oh, buy you a drink, get over here. You know what I mean? Like, so like I'm just so happy and relieved at this point that I have a son. Yeah, he's early. Yeah, I couldn't make his birth, but he's alive. So like in my heart, I'm like, thank you, Lord. So I literally I land, my friend picks me up from here, takes me straight to the hospital. We find out that he has to be in the NICU for 2 months.
Yeah.
And so I can't take my baby home,
Yeah.
and 3 pounds. And
He too
so
little.
that's a whole nother experience there in the NICU, feeling kind of helpless. And again, I didn't really deal with some of those demons from the miscarriages. I started taking out my pride and my anger on the doctors and the nurses who are trying to help my baby, like I'm not understanding things. So, and then obviously that was like 7 months ago. Now he's healthy, he's fat, you know what I mean? Like he's just fat, he's eating, there's no issues with him and things like that. But now that I look back and things are going well, like I know that God had to really work on my heart through this time. And now I can say that, you know what? Although that was a traumatic experience, I could really live the Bible, the part of the Bible that says God will work all things out together for your good if you love him and trust him and are called by his name. And, as much as I really wanted to give up on my faith because of something that happened to me, as if nothing ever happens to anybody else, it's not fair. I still chose to say, in those times, like, God, I know you're real. I'm upset at you right now. It might not be right, but I still want to trust you. I still want to trust that you'll still bless me and have that promise. And I think because of that mental place that I put myself in, that God was able to reveal to me that, although it was traumatic, that he used those situations to strengthen myself. My marriage with my wife right now is real strong. We'll go through our challenges again because challenges are cyclical, right? They come, they go, and they make you stronger for the next phase that God has for you. But, the last 2.5 years of just this experience of, real bad miscarriages to finally getting my son, but can't even take him home till 2 months later. God really revealed to me that I need to be patient. I'm a very actionable guy, right? I was a CEO of a big business, and you understand this, you're a CEO. I'm a business coach. I'm just very actionable. But for the first times in my life, through the miscarriages and the NICU experience, I had zero control over anything that happened. And that showed me that although I'm actionable, I have to also understand the balance of life to where there's certain things that you just cannot control. And you have to trust God for that. So my prayer is that if I ever go through any type of similar experience or any other trauma in my life, that I would be steadfast in my faith and say, God, okay, we've been through this before. Strengthen me to be steadfast and planted,
Yeah, thanks for sharing that, man. I so appreciate, we talked about this before the podcast, right? It's like you want to share as much as you're comfortable with, but more than you think you ought. Like I love that thought, and I appreciate you going to some of those places. And we're now heading off the top of this episode and coming towards the back end. And I want to ask you some reflective questions. But some of these may be hard, maybe heavy, and I would say as much as you're hitting 10 for 10 on the going for the gut. So please continue to do that. But I'm curious, how did you guys cope with some of this stuff? What were some of the activities that you did? You talked a little bit about how this hits your marriage in a really tough way. One of those things that you did that was positive was counseling. And one of those coping mechanisms you guys that did that was negative, which was just kind of coming at each other, which again, these are really common ways to kind of behave, but slowing it down a little bit and looking back, is there anything else that you did? Hey, this helped push me in the right direction, or hey, this held me back.
Yeah.
For your wife as well, too. I mean, she's not here, so she can't speak for herself. But
I could speak from what we've talked about as a community. But one thing that helped us was, number one, counseling, and not just any type of counseling, but counseling with people that actually been through what we've been through, or at least has some real life experience from their clients of what they've been through. To kind of the questions were, how do we cope through this? It almost felt like we had a dead child, right?
Yeah.
How do we cope with that? Another big thing that my wife and I said that we'll be intentional in doing is spending more time with the children that we do have. Because they kind of got ignored in this whole entire process, honestly. I didn't even get to that.
Tell me more about that.
Yeah, so our anger towards each other started getting directed towards them. Our frustration towards my wife and her towards me, obviously I can't kick my wife out of my house. I can't fire her from the business that we're running together. So a lot of times our frustration would just get taken out on the kids. Like, why isn't this clean? Why aren't you getting an A on your homework?
Yeah.
And so we started seeing the disconnect with our kids. And my oldest one is now a teenager, but this was her preteen life, right? Like a very monumental part of her life, and a very moldable part of her life. So we were frustrated with them a lot. And so what we did is, number one, got counseling. Number two, starting appreciating the kids that we did have and letting them know how much of a blessing they are to us. So in those declarations, our hearts started to change, because our words towards each other and towards ourselves and our insecurities of this was really creating a negative environment for ourselves.
Yeah.
I blamed myself a lot, and I verbalized it out loud, and I did not know and realize how that really affected me.
Yeah.
The Bible says, out of your tongue, mouth, your heart speaks. Your tongue has the power to give life and death to your situation.
Yeah.
I believe that's in what we manifest. I'm not like one of those weird people that manifest, all that stuff, but I do know that if I'm saying negative things over and over again, scientifically, my brain is setting that RAS towards what I'm saying.
Yeah, I think the secular version of that would be self-fulfilling prophecy.
Exactly.
When you commit to the negativity of something, it usually finds reality in life.
Absolutely. So, and then dating my wife, like having that one-on-one time with her and remembering all the good moments that we had. The first couple of dates were a little tough. There was really not much we wanted to say to each other.
Yeah.
But, huh?
Oh, I said, yeah, no, I get that. Like sometimes after a trauma like that, you had mentioned it. Sometimes it's hard to know what to say, but I resonate with that. After something, you just don't feel that there's anything meaningful that you can say.
Yeah. Well, I remember there was a couple of times I tried to encourage her, and then her response non-verbally was like, "You don't know what I went through physically." And then I got offended to that, because I'm like, well, I know how much it was emotionally. I'm just trying to be your husband.
Yeah.
And so guys and girls internalize things differently, and we get offended a lot by things that she might be saying, and we're interpreting it differently, and vice versa. But we started dating and having that one-on-one time, and then started spending time with the kids. Getting out of the house where everything happened was also a big deal, like just being able to get out and do that. And then just, it was like that slow, mundane, like we started doing these things and it started getting better slowly, but we really had to be intentional about talking about it and letting each other know that we forgive each other. Because I did not know that I was blaming her for it, and she was blaming me for it. And we just kind of have to say, look, I know that you did not have a choice to lose our baby, and I didn't either. So whatever we're holding and harboring in, maybe we're blaming each other because you're the easiest person to blame. I forgive you for hurting me, and I would love for you to forgive me for hurting you. And so just the healing process took some time, but it had to start off with getting out of the house where everything happened and having some intentional dates where we talk about it.
Yeah.
Talk about it.
Oh, that's good. That's really, really good. Yeah, because it's hard when the two of you want something really bad, and then you don't get it, and there really isn't someone to blame. Yeah, we want, especially after this like COVID season we went into, right? Like all of us have dealt with some really rough stuff, and we really want someone to blame. But like, how do you blame a virus? How do you blame a miscarriage? Like, and I think that's why some people struggle, whether they're people of faith or not. But like, there's some kind of force or circumstance you want to blame, and there's no one to blame, and it's really hard to get out of that, because we live in a blame culture, especially in the U.S. Like it's always somebody's fault. Everything that happens is always somebody's fault, and it's just a matter of figuring out who it is. We're very judicial in that sense. But follow-up question, because you talked about the difference between like husbands and wives and all this. I think it's really helpful for listeners to know, what is the part that's difficult about being a husband in miscarriage? What was so difficult for you being in the position of husband, expectant father, that was unique to that role?
That's a loaded question, brother. The thing that comes to my mind immediately when you ask that question was, the thing that was hardest for me was that I felt as if all the attention and all of the empathy went towards my wife, because she physically went through it.
Right.
I think it's easy to forget that, hey, the husband, the father, especially if the father wanted this baby, is also dealing with some emotional garbage and trauma.
Yeah.
But men, we tend to internalize it, so we won't show it physically. I showed up strong, like, we got this, thank you, you know what I mean? but there wasn't anybody that pulled me aside and said, hey brother, how are you really feeling, man? Like, let's go get a beer. Let's talk about this. Let's go on a walk. Let's go fishing. Let's go on a camping trip. Let's talk about this, because I can just imagine that you're going through this. And so like my wife got a lot of that from her family, from friends and things like that. But I think the hardest thing for men in my experience is that we're easily overlooked in a miscarriage. Yeah. Because we're not the physical ones that carried the baby, had the physical trauma, all that stuff.
Yeah. How did the
best way I can answer the question?
Oh, I think it's a fantastic answer to the question. I think that you hit the nail on the head for a lot of guys. So what'd you do? You weren't getting the attention. You weren't getting the responses that you need. You said you kind of get strong, but what did that lead to ultimately for you? Because you don't seem like you're acting that way now.
Oh no, I mean, I there are moments where I have dreams, a little bit of PTSD from it and things like that. But the way I am now was not the same Joe. Like if you were literally talk to me, if we had this podcast a year ago, you probably wouldn't be getting these things. But I think that what happened was when I noticed that nobody was asking what I was doing, and I didn't even vocalize like, hey guys, what about me? I internalized it and I became bitter. I literally became a little bit bitter towards the community, the church community, our friends. Kind of like, well, why isn't anybody asking me these questions? And I didn't even realize that it's also my responsibility to say, hey guys, like I'm going through something right now. Like I could use a guy to talk to. You know, I think for guys it's really hard to do that. It's a pride thing, which I have a lot. I'm not even going to talk for anybody else, and I'm talking me. So that's what I did. I internalized it, and I think that's really where the big fights came from, because I chose to suppress it. I chose to become bitter about it. And then again, my wife's the easiest target, you know, and in my emotional garbage, I unfortunately took out a lot of my anger on her, which wasn't fair at all.
Yeah. Yeah, I get that. So it's tough with talking with friends and family. You kind of answered my next question a little bit. So I'm curious about some people listen to this podcast because they know somebody that's gone through a miscarriage and they're trying to figure out, hey, can I get the scoop? Can I get the story? A lot of grandparents or parents who have kids or grandkids that are going through miscarriage listen to this for some tips and some insight. So my question for you is, as you spoke with other people and they found out, what was helpful that things people said, speaking into your story, questions they asked, encouragements they gave? What were things that were unhelpful, things that might have been hurtful or didn't really place you in the light that you wanted to be placed, or really see you in the way that you wanted to be seen? So what were some of the things that were really helpful that people said? And you don't have to out anybody. If you want to, you can, but you could just say like a relative or a friend, said this and this was helpful, or they said this and this really didn't meet me where I was at, or this was hurtful.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you what doesn't help, and this is just for me, is when people tell you, oh, I know what you've been through, but everything's going to be okay. She or he is in a better place. Like, I already know that, right? Like, it's number one, did you experience what I've been through? And number two, like, if you did, you would know that right now telling me what you think I want to hear is not helping. So just listen. Just, even if I'm not going to talk to you about it, just be like, hey, brother, like, I can imagine what you might be going through right now. I'm available to talk. Do you want to meet somewhere or something like that? Like, if you just need a listening ear, I'm pretty sure there's a lot on your chest that you want to get off. I'm here, but sometimes I feel like people feel like they have to kind of justify, and especially the church community, they want to encourage you that, oh, your kid's with the Lord now and everything like that, which again, I know that, but it doesn't fix the hurt that I'm feeling at the moment. But hey, if I could just talk with you and get it off my chest, and maybe just kind of put your hand on my shoulder and be like, hey, I can imagine how you're feeling. I don't know, but I can imagine. Because again, even if somebody went through a miscarriage before, do they 100% know exactly how you feel? Because every miscarriage is different, right? My first one was traumatic. Most people that I know have never had a traumatic miscarriage like that. But the miscarriage in itself is already a traumatic thing. So I remember, I don't know if you remember this, but when you posted on Facebook about that, I messaged you and I said, hey, brother, if you need to talk, I can imagine how you're feeling. Just let me know. And you said thank you, and that was it. And I was like, okay, cool. He's dealing with his thing. I just knew because I needed that. You know, I needed that. Maybe just to, hey, let's go get a drink really quick. I can get out that, I can use some time out of the house. I can use some time away from the kid. I can use some time away from, my wife, where we're kind of getting at it a little bit. Like, hey, let's talk. I could use that. So I think that answers both of your questions. What works, what doesn't work. I can imagine that most guys will feel that way. Again, some might want the console, but I'm the type of person where I don't open up to everybody. So if someone's going to give me counseling or an opinion, I really have to respect them to receive it. So if you're just anybody coming and say, hey, let me talk to you about why this, like, just say sorry you went through it and then move on,
Yeah, no, I've talked to a lot of guys. It's surprising. Most guys do want to talk about it.
Yeah.
I was somebody that didn't want to talk about it until later. My friend Jeremy, who's the first guy I interviewed, he did not want to talk about it because for him and how he processes, talking about it and mulling it over with other people wasn't helpful. He needed alone time. He needed solitude. He really needed to process and center himself. And so different people need different things. But the one thing I feel like everybody needs, and this is just more confirming, is just basically for somebody to say like, hey, I see you.
Yeah.
That's a lot of what the guys need, is just to know that like they're not being ignored, that they're being acknowledged. And I think sometimes guys feel pretentious because it's like, no one's asking me. And then they say, hey, you want to talk about it? It's like, no, not really.
Yeah.
It feels so childish, I think sometimes, but it's kind of like, hey, that's okay. Yeah. It's okay to say all I wanted was for somebody to acknowledge me and just to reach out. And so for anybody listening that maybe you're working or talking or know a guy that's going through it, it's okay to say, I'm here for you if you need me, like make the same offer. And it is also okay for them to say, thanks.
Yeah.
And that's it. Like, that's also okay. Like, here you go. Case in point. Like, this is all okay. I got a couple more questions for you before I lose you. And we run out of time here, but, I like this question. What was the thing that you feel like no one knew about your situation, about your marriage at the time, or about you? What was something that you felt like, oh, and the reason I asked this question is because I think for others listening to it, knowing others going through miscarriage, it's helpful for them to know that there's big stuff that they just don't see, and maybe don't just assess the situation from the front end, but there's stuff going on inside internally or within that relationship or whatever, that could be really big. And you may never get access to it, but to kind of hold it in a heavy weight. So you don't have to have anything, but can you think of anything that you feel like from the outside was going on or was happening that you just feel like nobody knew?
Yeah. Number one, and I'm coming on a position of faith. I was a minister at church and things like that. I was literally considering just walking away from the faith, honestly. And that's huge. I grew up in an abusive home where faith was like beat into us, and I wanted to walk away then, but I found a true relationship with Jesus and I chose to live like that. But something like this really made me want to walk away because I felt like God was playing with me. Honestly, I felt like it was like a toy, a game. That was one thing that a lot of people did not know, but besides my wife and I. Another one was I literally got feelings of suicide, and it wasn't like kill yourself, like it wasn't like strong, but it was almost to the point where it's like, you know what I mean? It's because of you that you lost your kid.
A lot of blame.
Maybe there was a lot of blame going on. And then so I would start getting these crazy ideas of why don't I just go hang myself? I hope you don't mind me getting like as transparent. But the thing is that I blame myself a lot for it. And I thought sometimes at a certain point that I'd probably be best gone, because if I can't give my wife that boy, or if something I'm doing is causing this miscarriage, why live? And honestly, and that, that's where I believe I ignored my 3 daughters, because if I would have done that, that was very selfish. Their lives would have been impacted, And so that's kind of all those things that were happening in my heart that nobody knew about were causing this negative chain effect with my wife and with my children as well. But yeah, because I felt like nobody really wanted to talk to me about it or anything like that, I literally started getting those feelings of, why am I even around?
Yeah. Such a scary spot too. No, I know you're not alone. And that seems to continue to be one of the things that's like, hey, nobody knew how deep the hole went for me, is what I hear from a lot of guys. Nobody seemed to know really just how dark it got. And I think it's because guys show up as if it's not a big deal because they feel like they should. But then that creates like a social expectation that people just expect that guys, it doesn't hit them as hard. And so now we're trapped in our own lie as men, I think, in our culture, because we do that because we feel like we're supposed to. And then we propagate that because we feel we're also lying to ourselves, thinking that it's true of others. And so it's just, man, that's what I love about this podcast too, is just kind of like, hey, let's just, let's cut the bullshit. That's not happening. That's not what's real. So no, thanks for answering that question. My next one, what do you regret? And I'll ask this a little bit differently. You talked a little bit about it, but if you could summarize it, what do you regret and or wish you had been able to do or do differently? So whichever version of that is most helpful. What do you regret, or what do you wish you had been able to do or do differently?
So that question is tough because going through it, like, you don't know that you're regretting a lot of things that you're doing. Now that I'm very aware of what happened and I can look back, what I regret was just telling my kids and making them believe that this is no big deal. Like, it's going to be okay. Which it is going to be okay, but they have to grieve the loss of their sibling too, right? They have to grieve the loss of the parents' presentness at the moment of going through all that trauma. They have to grieve the fact that they knew they almost lost their mom because she bled out and we didn't take her in on time.
Yeah.
So I regret just pretending like everything was okay in front of my kids just to be strong for them. Yeah. If I could do it differently, and especially since I have girls, I would show them that, hey, dad's not doing too well right now, but I'm just going to hold you guys and we're going to get through this together. I definitely think that would have been the better way to go, because I also see my kids now. Some of them are very glossed over when it comes to hard situations, like where it's okay to feel emotional. It's okay to tell your kids, dad's not cool right now. He's not okay. Like, I'm a human, I think I would have done that differently.
Yeah. What a gift to be able to do that differently for your son.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, yeah.
Sure.
So I got 2, maybe 3 more questions here. We're rounding up the corner. What, if anything, do you do to continue to heal, cope, or memorialize the miscarriages now that you're in a different season?
One thing we wanted to do, but we haven't done, was like celebrate the birthday. I don't know why we haven't. We just talked about it and didn't do it, but we talk about it often. Like, we literally talk about it in conversation. Hey, so what do you think he would have been like? Like, this is awesome, cool, we're gonna see him again. And we can literally do that honestly now, not playing around, not trying to pretend like we're okay. Because we know how normal this is to happen to people.
Yeah.
Just to kind of talk as if like, hey, yeah, we did lose a sibling, but man, like, what do you think he would have done? Do you think he would have had blonde hair or this or that? So just kind of talking about it with the kids to help them to understand, like, we're good now. We're not going to get into these huge fights because we're blaming each other. We're blaming you for this. So that's one way to memorialize their life, because it was, no matter what people believe, it was a life. That life was growing in my wife's stomach, and it was our son, our 2 sons. I honestly believe that, but just kind of honoring what happened as a milestone as to why we are where we are now. Like,
yeah,
and letting the kids know, like, hey, mom and dad screwed up twice when it came to this. Let's talk about what we don't do when we're going through a lot of challenges and pressures, what we're tempted to do. So we're a lot more open about it now as a family.
Yeah, that's good. That's good leadership for your kids, man. I want to commend you for that. It's hard to lead with your kids because you want to be super dad and super mom. You don't ever want to have to like admit that like you wish you had done better. And I think it's so powerful for kids to hear that, especially as they grow up. It teaches them things that they're not going to learn at school. I'll tell you that.
No, that's for sure.
All right, second to last question. I like this question too, because podcasts are really fun because they memorialize the experience. It's a place in time that people can go back to, you can go back to, and then even your wife or your kids. So my question is, what would you want your kids and your wife to know about you in this? They may come back to this later. I mean, you've got a son now who I know is not going to be listening to podcasts, but give it 15 years, he may go find this. He may search his dad's name on the internet and this comes up. What would you want to say now to them, I guess, but also like, what would you want them to know about you in this in the future?
Well, first of all, I would want them to know that I don't regret that this happened. I know that, God has worked on our hearts. He used this to strengthen me, but I'd want them to know that there's a lot that we can't control in life, but the only thing that we can control is our reaction to it. So Extreme Ownership, there's a book called Extreme Ownership by Jocko Willink, the SEAL Team 6 commander. And he went through a lot of stuff and people have died under his command and things like that. And he's like, there's things you can't control, but you also have to take extreme ownership for everything that happens around you and how you choose to react. So I want them to know that in every situation, whether it's controlled or not, we control our reaction. And then I would also want them to know that Dad apologizes for, hurting them while I was going through my pain. And it's okay to not be okay. It's okay to reach out for help. It's okay to say, hey, I'm tapping out for a second. I need to talk to somebody. I need help. It's okay. That I think is better leadership than pretending. And then all of a sudden things crash and it's irreparable because you built your foundation on paper,
Yeah.
That's what I would say.
That's really good. My last question for you is, what would you tell yourself then, given what you know now?
Talk to somebody. I mean, you don't have to go to like a group, like an AA group for miscarried men, but like reach out. Men are willing to talk. We're just not ones to try to be like, hey, do you want to talk? You know what I mean? Like, I found that if I've met other people that have miscarriages, I'm like, hey, like, do you mind talking with me about it? Because I went through that. And sometimes I feel like I'm the only one. And they're like, dude, me too. Yeah, let's go do a one-to-one. Let's get a drink. You know what I mean? Let's go and do that. I think men are reaching out for that. So now that I've been through this, I look at it as a ministry just to talk to other men who's been through it. Not to say I know exactly what you're going through because our emotions are different, but just to be like, yo, dude, I know all the tension's on your wife and it should be on a physical level, but do you want to get something off your chest? Because if you do, I'm here to hear you,
Yeah, that's good.
And you don't need to blame yourself. Yeah.
Oh, that last, sneaking one in at the end there, man.
Yeah.
You don't need to blame yourself or your wife.
Or your wife.
The shame blame game, bro, will take you places that you really don't want to go, which is hard because it's so much easier to blame. It's so much easier to find something to point out.
Well, I think as humans, we don't like feeling guilty about anything.
Oh yeah. Right. Yeah. I don't. Yeah. Joe, thank you so much, brother. This was a fantastic time for me. I know that it's heavy and tough stuff, but I appreciate the heck out of you reaching out and being willing to talk about your multiple miscarriages. And I, along with you, I'm super grateful for your son. I'm glad that you've got your fat little boy that you get to raise up as a good man. And that makes me really excited. And being a dad of a girl, I'm sure I'll be giving you a call in the future, figuring out how to figure that one out. But I mean, she's only 5 months right now, but man,
I'm still figuring out, bro. So, I've done wrong, but
reminisce and ruminate.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you again, brother. Appreciate you.
Have a great day.
You too.